When Universal opened their second theme park in Florida in 1999, they brought with it a land entirely themed around their Jurassic Park franchise, featuring its own visitor center, water ride, and a mysterious attraction offering the chance to have a face-to-face meeting with real dinosaurs. An attraction that barely made it through the park's first couple of years before it was forced to close. So let's take a look at the story of Universal's ambitious Triceratops Encounter, its many problems, the attempts to save it, and how an animatronic show ended up sitting abandoned in the middle of a Florida theme park. In May 1999, Islands of Adventure opened at the Universal Orlando Resort. A step away from the movie studio theming of Universal's previous parks in both Florida and Hollywood, Islands of Adventure would open with 6 distinctly themed islands, each carrying a different setting, wholly taking place within a fantasy world. The park contained an entrance land, a comic strip cartoon character land, a mystical fantasy land featuring unicorns, dragons, and a brush with Poseidon, and lands with IP licensed from the worlds of Marvel and Dr. Seuss. And at the very back of the park, across the large central lagoon, would be Islands of Adventure's big draw, a land entirely modelled on Universal's hugely successful movie franchise, Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park just made perfect sense to bring to Islands of Adventure. The films were incredibly popular, and after all, the Jurassic Park in the movie was a sort of theme park itself, so much of its world would transfer over really easily. And it was yet another movie from Steven Spielberg, the director who had already worked closely with Universal's theme parks for over a decade at that point, having involvement in attractions like Jaws, Back to the Future, and E.T. Jurassic Park had already made its way to Universal theme parks earlier that decade, with the opening of Jurassic Park The Ride at Universal Studios Hollywood, a massive and incredibly detailed water ride on the park's ever-expanding lower lot. In fact, so eager was Universal to create a Jurassic Park attraction that ride had actually started development while the original movie was still in production. And with both the movie and the Hollywood ride going down well with the general public, Universal were desperate to open yet more Jurassic Park attractions. The land at Islands of Adventure would be its own Jurassic Park, complete with large gates just like in the movie marking the entrance. Inside, guests would find a visitors center, gift shops, a kids area, and dining locations, all themed as if they were real in-universe places. The aim at Islands of Adventure, according to Universal themselves, was total immersion. Unlike at next-door Universal Studios, where many rides were themed to film sets of the movies they were based on, with guests playing the role of actors, the idea of this new park was to create lands that felt like they actually did exist within their respective stories. And so, to maintain this idea, Universal would insist that this version of Jurassic Park, and the dinosaurs inside it, were real. In a TV special released in the run-up to the park's opening, they would explain the backstory for the land. Set on the island of Isla Aventura, this would be the park that John Hammond would have built had he had a second chance after the mishap on Isla Nublar, a finally fully functional version now open to tourists. In the land, guests could visit the Jurassic Park Discovery Center, a building similar to the visitor center from the movie, but now containing things like a gift shop and an educational area with hands-on exhibits teaching guests about dinosaurs. There was also a kids' play area named Camp Jurassic, a kids' flying ride named the Pteranodon Flyers, and the main attraction of the land, a sightseeing trip down a river to get a glimpse at the park's dinosaurs in their natural habitat. In reality, a copy of the Jurassic Park ride from Hollywood, now renamed to Jurassic Park River Adventure. But lastly, tucked away next to the kids area, would sit probably the land's closest commitment to the immersive storytelling. A walkthrough attraction promising guests an opportunity to have a face-to-face meeting with a real-life dinosaur, named Triceratops Encounter. In the same pre-opening TV special, an actor playing John Hammond would give an in-universe preview of the attraction. Triceratops Encounter was a backstage look at the areas where Jurassic Park staff monitor and care for the dinosaurs, much like you might find at any typical zoo. He would point out equipment like the remote security station, which tracked every dinosaur in the park, and the feeding station, containing large bags of dino chow. Behind him, scientists would work away studying the eating habits of the park's dinosaurs. And lastly, he would show off the crown jewel of Triceratops Encounter. Of course, one of the park's Triceratops, a massive creature being cared for by a park vet. And on opening day, the public would get their own look at the new attraction. Guests would enter the attraction's queue line past a parked Jeep. In the queue, they would walk through 3 buildings, each dedicated to a different aspect of the park operations, extensively themed with props and tiny details, and with conversations between park staff played over loudspeakers to provide more context for the work that went on in each room. In the first building would be the security area, containing the large remote monitoring station, where they could see a radar showing dinosaur locations. The station also housed several CCTV monitors of various locations around the park. This building also contained lockers with park uniforms and a rack of tranquilizer rifles and other security equipment, and guests could hear radio chatter from the park security team. The second building in the queue was for food storage, and for research on dinosaur diets, with the dino chow from the TV special piled in the corner. The walls were decorated with feeding schedules, with the names of each of the dinosaurs being cared for, and information for how different species needed to be fed. The third building was named the Field Research Outpost, a more general research area where scientists of all backgrounds would work, studying the dinosaurs' behavior, containing several workbenches, and tucked away, damaged transport crates, hinting at the problems Jurassic Park may face with its more aggressive dinosaurs. Here, guests would watch a brief pre-show, an introduction to the facility from a Universal team member, playing the role of a research scientist. A short, comedic segment where they would show guests some of their research, involving strapping a camera to the head of a velociraptor, resulting in it chasing one of their colleagues.
Fantastic, and here it is. That's where the subject raptor is just now waking up. And there's where he spots Dr. Jeffries, isn't that marvelous? Run, Jeffries!
Then it was time for the main attraction. Guests would be told they were going to head into one of the park's 3 medical bays to meet a sick Triceratops, receiving treatment from a park vet. The attraction did actually hold 3 identical medical bays, each containing a Triceratops with a different name: Sarah, Chris, or Topper. Of course, being a theme park attraction, this was done to allow for increased capacity. But naming the Triceratops had the added benefit of selling the illusion that these were real dinosaurs being cared for. Heading into the medical bay, they would get their first look at the live dinosaur. Obviously not real, but a massive animatronic Triceratops, 10 feet tall and 24 feet long, lumbering and making noise as guests entered. Creating the 3 animatronics had been a significant undertaking for Universal. They of course had dinosaur animatronics before for Jurassic Park the ride, but those had been far away from guests and not seen for very long. The Triceratops, on the other hand, would be the focus of the attraction, and the hope was that guests would be able to get right up close to them. So a lot more attention to detail was needed to sell their realism. The animatronics were made by Spar Aerospace, the company that built the robotic arms used on space shuttle missions. Weighing 7.5 tons, the dinosaurs could blink their eyes, dilate their pupils, and flare their nostrils. They were also capable of bigger movements too, like acting out being agitated, stamping their feet and rearing up. The vet would treat the Triceratops in front of guests, checking its ears, monitoring its heart rate, and looking at the screens at the side of the room. While doing this, they would talk to guests about Triceratops, teaching them about the animal, and fielding questions from the audience. The short presentation had a rough outline, but was still relatively free-flowing, allowing the team member playing the vet to improvise and interact more with the guests. On some showings, the vet would tickle the Triceratops' nose with a plant, causing it to sneeze on guests. Typically, it would also throw a tantrum midway through the show, moving around and making more noise, and lifting up its front foot, before being calmed down again. And in some showings, guests would be invited to pet the animatronic. After around 5 minutes or so, the encounter would come to an end, and guests would be encouraged to visit the Discovery Center to find out more about dinosaurs as they exited the attraction. Despite being a well-conceived experience, Triceratops Encounter was never particularly popular in the early days of Islands of Adventure. Within the Jurassic Park land, it was a clear second to the much more prominent River Adventure, one of the major attractions in the entire park. It also suffered somewhat from its placement in the park. While the twisting queue line hidden within the trees helped sell the illusion that this was a backstage area of Jurassic Park, and it helped keep an air of mystery to the big reveal of the Triceratops, it also made Triceratops Encounter very easy to miss. Despite being signposted, many casual guests would walk straight past it, not knowing that there was an entire attraction down the pathway. Even if they did notice it, the exact nature of what Triceratops Encounter was could be a bit confusing, with the park map just promising a chance to pet a moving, breathing dinosaur, but without any real explanation available of whether this was simply a meet and greet or a fully fledged attraction. And for the small number of guests that did get to experience it, there were still further problems. As impressive as the 3 animatronics were, they also broke down frequently, often requiring extended maintenance and regular closures of the attraction. And when these animatronics would break down in the middle of a show, it would shatter the illusion that was at the core of the experience. The low attendance had the added side effect that guests would speed through the rather long queue line where a lot of the attraction's storytelling took place. So a lot of those walkthrough elements that Triceratops Encounter had were missed even by people who did manage to find the attraction. And this one isn't really a problem, but when the team member asked the guests if they had any questions, rather than the questions being about maybe what Triceratops eat, the questions were almost exclusively kids asking if the Triceratops was real.
Yes, she's the most real dinosaur you will ever see.
The following year, in 2000, Triceratops Encounter's description was updated in the park map to try and make it a little bit more obvious what to expect. But with continued technical malfunctions from the complex animatronics, very little changed. Through 2001, it experienced only sporadic operation, and towards the end of the year, it was renamed to Triceratops Discovery Trail, another attempt to make its purpose clearer. They also gave it Express Pass, as if anyone would ever need to use Express Pass for Triceratops Encounter. In 2002, amid its downtime, the attraction was used as a dinosaur-themed haunted house at that year's Halloween Horror Nights, named Project Evolution, adding scare actors, velociraptors, and a severed Triceratops head prop to the attraction, depicting a dilapidated dinosaur-human hybrid experiment gone wrong. Ironically, that year you would have had a better chance seeing this version of Triceratops Encounter than the real thing. Over the next few years, downtime grew, and it became rare to see the attraction operating for more than a few months in the peak season. Until eventually, by mid-2004, Triceratops Encounter quietly closed permanently. But naturally, that's not the end of the story. Because of its relative obscurity, Universal did very little to the attraction when it was closed. The entrance was blocked off with simple planters, and the signage was removed from the Triceratops fossil, which now just acted as decoration for the broader Jurassic Park area. But everything within Triceratops Encounter, the queue buildings, the props lying around the place, and the 3 dinosaur animatronics were all left exactly as they were, awaiting the day when Universal might be able to reuse them. Nothing of note really happened in the late 2000s, but after 5 years of sitting there, seemingly out of nowhere, the Triceratops Discovery Trail reopened, under the same name as before. In December 2010, the attraction was soft-opened, with guests surveyed afterwards to gauge opinions. The new version was mostly the same as before, with guests still getting to meet one of the 3 Triceratops, as a member of park staff taught them about the species. But the previous long queue was completely bypassed, and the pre-show from the opening version had also been cut. Instead, guests were just brought in through the former exit and taken directly to one of the pens. Kids were no longer invited to pet the animatronic either. And to make up for this, a Universal team member brought around a brand new baby Triceratops, really a puppet operated by the team member, sat above a fake arm. An attraction that had been closed and forgotten about for 5 years, magically reopening was a miracle, and the small number of fans that did know about its history hoped that over time, Universal would reopen the rest of the queue and bring the Discovery Trail back as a year-round, fully operating attraction. Throughout 2011, the new, reduced version of the Discovery Trail continued on-again, off-again operation, as Universal trialled it with more guests. But these trials didn't amount to anything permanent, and at the end of the year, the attraction closed just as it had done in 2004, never to return. Just as they had done with the original closure, Universal left Triceratops Encounter exactly as it had been, still on park maps, just not labelled. But this time around, a closed animatronic show in the middle of a Universal theme park did find itself drawing some new attention. Of course, as I've mentioned on this channel in a few videos already, the early 2010s was something of a boom era for the world of theme park urban explorers. Something that had once been attempted in secret, very rarely shared on blogs, often years after the fact, was now being shown off regularly online, mainly on YouTube. If you've watched my video on the history of Disney World urban exploring, you'll know that Disney were a key target for Central Florida urbex, mainly because of the scale of the resort and its long tenure in the area, providing plenty of abandoned locations. But the urban exploring craze was turning its attention towards far more than just Disney World. And naturally, it was only a matter of time before it ended up at Universal Studios too. In 2012, only a few months after it closed, multiple urban explorers uploaded videos of journeys into Triceratops Encounter. The key points of interest on these trips were of course the 3 animatronics, standing dormant in their empty enclosures. In some videos, one of the Triceratops was found untouched, exactly as it had been during the show's operation, but the other 2 were found partially dismantled, one missing its eyes, showing the complex machinery behind them, and the other with its entire head completely removed and put to one side. This is, of course, a bit creepy, but I would hesitate to declare these animatronics as entirely abandoned at this point. Admittedly, the word abandoned when it's used to describe theme park attractions can be a bit difficult to pin down. There are various states of abandonment. Some things are left in disarray while still occasionally being monitored, whereas others are alone entirely. But in my opinion, at this point so soon after the show's closure, I don't think this footage shows abandoned animatronics as much as it just shows animatronics that were actively being removed or repaired, just not on the day that this footage was filmed. The enclosures were still relatively clean, and the animatronics had been carefully dismantled. We know that this was an attraction that experienced regular breakdowns, so it's quite likely that this is just what the animatronics looked like even before Triceratops Encounter was closed. But what did look abandoned was the queue. The area that hadn't been used since the early 2000s was now windswept, with the queue line's thick foliage spilling into it, and with the props and theming, including the Jurassic Park Jeep, still there, now worn down by years of neglect. I would have loved to be able to write in my script that Triceratops Encounter was ironically more popular after its closure than it had been when it was open. But perhaps in an even more fitting manner for the often forgotten attraction, it was still a far less popular destination than other urban exploring targets at Florida theme parks, like Disney's River Country or Wonders of Life. And so it never had any sort of significant urbex mishap or drama attached to it, like some of those other locations did. It continued its semi-abandonment throughout the 2010s, and the fossilized Triceratops that served as the entrance marker eventually gained a new plaque describing the animal, turning it once again into just a standard decoration for the land. According to Theme Park Stop, the animatronics stood in the attraction until early 2014, when they were eventually dismantled completely and removed. In 2015, a video from Theme Park Stop showed some minor construction happening near the entrance, as rumours were flying around of a return of a similar attraction, this time not featuring the Triceratops, but a Velociraptor. And the following month, Universal opened Raptor Encounter at the former entrance, a short meet and greet with a Velociraptor costumed character that would appear from behind an electrified fence, with the accompanying park ranger inviting guests to take a photo if they dared to get close to it. The new meet and greet was a much smaller experience. There was no themed queue, no pre-show, and no animatronics, and the whole thing was over in under a minute. But it was much more successful with guests, most likely because, unlike before, it was actually visible from the walkways. But behind the Raptor Encounter, the remains of the previous iteration of the space sat untouched, and urban exploring continued, with further videos surfacing online, now showing that the queue line was definitely abandoned. Even more of a mess than it had been back in 2012, and with the props covered in a thick layer of dust. Videos from 2017 showed the inside of the Triceratops enclosures, confirming that the animatronics had been removed. The final urban exploring videos were shared in 2018, the most dilapidated it had been. But at the end of that year, change would finally arrive at Triceratops Encounter. A rumoured new attraction for the area had been discussed on fan forums since the closure in 2012, and most of these rumours revolved around the park receiving a new roller coaster. An early concept for a Jurassic Park coaster had been designed in 2001, a wooden coaster with a track designed to look like a dinosaur skeleton. That coaster would have likely opened sometime around 2009, carrying a Velociraptor theme, but ultimately the concept wasn't taken any further. In 2012, a lot of the rumours suggested that the new ride would begin construction immediately after the new Transformers ride at the Universal Studios park. Obviously, with the urban explorers sticking around for so many years afterwards, this didn't happen. But in 2018, it did seem like there was now actual movement. On May 9th, a user on the Inside Universal forum named Magic uncovered a permit for construction and demolition of an unspecified area within Islands of Adventure, an area that was about the same size as Triceratops Encounter. And the following day, Universal announced that the Jurassic Park ride in Hollywood would be rethemed to the newer Jurassic World movies, the second of which was just about to release, further fueling speculation that some sort of Jurassic World changes were coming to Florida too. In June, Blue, the Velociraptor from the new movies, was brought to Raptor Encounter. And later in the year, the entire Raptor Encounter was moved to a new, temporary location, as fences were put up around the old Triceratops Encounter area. And after 6 years of abandonment, demolition began. In 2019, Jurassic Park was transformed into a mess of construction walls, and anything that remained of Triceratops Encounter was completely demolished, as track pieces arriving nearby confirmed that Universal weren't building the rumoured family wooden coaster, but a massive steel one. In September 2020, when the track was already complete, Universal eventually announced the new ride, Jurassic World Velocicoaster, an LSM launch coaster manufactured by Intamin, finding a use for the Velociraptor idea from all those years ago. The new coaster officially opened in June 2021, sweeping across the lake in front of the Discovery Center and reaching a top speed of 70 miles an hour, making it the new fastest coaster at the resort. The Raptor Encounter photo op was permanently moved to a site further back in the land, and any traces of the original Triceratops Encounter vanished. Except for one. For a split second underneath the track, you can see a bag of dino chow from the food storage section of the Triceratops queue, a subtle nod to Universal's now long forgotten animatronic show. Usually with a lot of these short-lived attractions, their failure comes down to a combination of technical problems and just being really bad. But in the case of Triceratops Encounter, I think it's only the first of those. Because this attraction did seem like a really well thought out concept. I'm a big fan of well-themed walkthrough attractions. And I'm also a big fan of attractions that really commit to the worlds their stories take place in. And Triceratops Encounter, at least the original version with the full queue, was both of these. I especially love when attractions are connected to other attractions in a park. Triceratops Encounter sort of served as a prequel for River Adventure, with the CCTV monitors showing some of the areas guests would accidentally end up on that ride, and the damaged crates alluding to what might go wrong over there. But of course, with its constant breakdowns and its really poor layout making it difficult for guests to stumble upon accidentally, it's easy to see why it ended up failing. It's disappointing that the animatronics did break down so much. For the time, they were pretty advanced, and they were also just a really good idea for a family-friendly attraction. Kids love dinosaurs, particularly friendly ones that they can pet. It was pretty short, and the fundamental elements of the experience, I guess, were a little basic, but I don't think that matters too much. I think I've said this in a previous video, or maybe two by this point, but theme parks need smaller attractions like this to add to the environment, to balance out the area, and to flesh out the story. It shouldn't be judged in isolation, but rather as a part of Jurassic Park as a whole. And I think in that regard, it was a positive for the park. I don't see it as likely that Triceratops Encounter will ever come back in any capacity. I never got to experience it myself, and to be honest, as cool as it may have been, I don't really find myself wishing for its return in the same way as several other former attractions that are much bigger. But if it ever did come back, I'd love to see a version that adds a little bit more beyond just the Triceratops. Maybe like a walkthrough of multiple different dinosaurs in different enclosures, teaching guests about different species. The attraction's legacy is not completely buried, though. In the last few years, the Universal Studios parks in both Hollywood and Japan have had walk-around Triceratops characters that guests can meet, although this is a costumed character rather than an animatronic, much like Islands of Adventure's Rapture Encounter. Did you ever get to experience either of the versions of Triceratops Encounter? What did you think of it? Let me know in the comments. Other than that, if you liked the video, please consider subscribing, as there are plenty more theme park videos coming in the future, and as always, I'll see you next time.